Okay, so we just reviewed the brayta that quoted the machlokes between the Yosy and the Chachamim. If an animal eats just a little bit of sprouting of a plant that sprouted through the ground, according to Yosy, we look at what this plant would have grown into had the animal not destroyed it, and that's what will be mechayev the mazik to pay. While the Chachamim say no such thing, you just look at the value of the land with these growths versus without. There will be a difference in cost, of course, because someone will pay more for a field that's already pre-planted, and that's the value that the mazik has to pay. But a vadi does not have to pay the value of the completely finished fruit, which is merely the potential that what the animal damaged had. Okay. Achlos, so that's the first machlokes that the Gemara is going to focus in on. But there's another shaila here in the Mishnah as well. Achlos smadar. Smadar is a novim dakim b'haschalosim. Right when the grapes form, they're very, very, very premature, but they're already a tiny little formed grape. We're already out of the category of just a plant. Rabbi Yeshua says that you look at it like it's fully grown grape. Similar to what Rabbi Yosy said regarding just a little sprouting, Rabbi Yeshua says if you have smader, which is a lot more developed, that I'll consider like it's fully developed grapes. The Chachamim are very consistent through all these cases. It's all based on the difference in value of the land. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, when do we say that you do what the Chacham says, Kama Hoysa Yafa Bekama Hi Yafa, Bizman She'achla Lulove Gefanim V'Yichayretenim, which are very, very premature, even before Smada. Aval Achla Pagim by Boiser. But if you ate Pagim or Boiser, which are grapes or figs that are even more developed than Smadar, so Reb Shimon is conspicuously leaving out Smadar. So we're going to have to focus on what he holds about Smadar. Because he says if you're only Lulovig Gefanim, which is premature to Smadar, then you just do it like a Karcha. But if it's more mature than Smadar, it's Pagam or Boiser, then Roy Noison Ki'ilu Anovim Oimdes Lebotzer. And the Gemara is going to ask soon, what does Reb Shimon hold? What does Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Reb Shimon, what does he hold by Smadar? Because it seems like Smadar can go both ways. And that's what the Gemara is going to probe. Okay, let's see the Gemara. So yesterday the Gemara concluded that you have a right from here that even though it doesn't say B'shishim, it means B'shishim, and that's why the Hahu Gavra, who argued on the Reish Galusa and used Rav Nachman to support him, that he shouldn't have to pay for that decal that he cut down full pop. He should only pay it assessed based on 60 times, which is much of a lower cost. And Rav Nachman supported him. And the Gemara tried to say that by Adam HaMazik, you don't have that leniency of B'shishim. So the Gemara proved that the same place, the same way in the Brisa, it doesn't mention Shishim. When it's talking about the damages paid by an Adam HaMazik, this Brisa that we just discussed doesn't either say anything about Shishim when it talks about the assessment. It just talks about either you pay for the fruit or you pay for the land, but you don't look at it in 60 times that amount. So you see, even though the Brisa doesn't say it, it could mean that, and therefore the same halacha and kula that applies to Mammon HaMazik can apply to Adam HaMazik as well. That was yesterday. But today we're going to now delve into the Brisa. Omar Abaye. Abaye said, so I skipped now about 6-7 lines. And I'm up to Omar Abaye. Let's see what that, yeah, but it's about 10-12 lines down from the top. Omar Abaye. Rabbi Yosy Aglili, Rabbi Shmuel, Amru Davarech. Rabbi Yosy Aglili and Rabbi Shmuel agreed to the same principle. Rabbi Yosy Aglili Hadamar. What did Rabbi Yosy Aglili said? We just learned him on Amr Aleph that if an animal ate just a sproutling, the owner of the animal has to pay for the full potential of that sproutling. You look at what this would have grown into, and that's what the owner has to pay. So Rabbi Shmuel says a similar halacha that shows that he also agrees that you look at potential and you make the Mazik pay for the potential. Because he says it's based on the potential that it had. Rabbi Shmuel, where did Rabbi Shmuel say that? The Tanya we learned, Meitav Sadeu, Umeitav Karm Ho Yishalim. When I learned this Gemara, I literally felt like the Gemara pulled the rug from under my feet. Because we thoroughly learned a sugya at the beginning of the Masechta, and it was on Vavam and Beis, about Meitav of Nizik and Meitav of Mazik, where Rabbi Shmuel said you pay the Meitav of the Nizik, and Rabbi Kiva says you pay the Meitav of the Mazik. And the Tosfos and the Gemara here are going to introduce a whole new machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, or a whole new meaning to their machlokes that I totally missed when I learned the Gemara and Davot. So let's have a recap. It says in the pasuk when a person is mazik, meitav sadeu umeitav karmo yishali. Meitav sadeu shel nizik umeitav karmo shel nizik. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel. That is the shita of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva argues. Rabbi Kiva Omer loy bo akosu ela ligvois l'nizaken min ha'idus. The Torah is only saying that a nizik gets to be paid with idus v'kavochomer lehedish. Now, what's a little bit difficult to understand in Rabbi Kiva is the words of Rabbi Kiva, loy bo akosu ela ligvois l'nizaken min ha'idus. That very much sounds like Rabbi Kiva is trying to be makel. You say Mitav Karmishal Nizik, Mitav Sadeo Shal Nizik. No, Loi Bo HaKos of Ella. So it's Mashal from Rabbi Kiva that he's coming to be Mekel. The question is, in what way is he being Mekel? Because by saying you pay the Idus of the Mazik, that's actually a Chumrah, not a Kula. Because all it tells you is if the Mazik had better properties than the Nizik, the Mazik has to give those better properties. Rabbi Shmuel holds, if the mazik has better properties than the nizik, you don't have to give those better properties. So it sounds almost like Rabbi Shmuel's mekel, but the words of Rabbi Kiva, loy ba'akasav, means that he's mekel. So the Gemara is going to show us something very interesting. If you remember, back on that Vav, Ravidi Bar Avin wanted to offer up another explanation to Rabbi Shmuel, which the Gemara rejected. Ravidi Bar Avin, it's speaking where one row was eaten by this animal in the property. In this field, there were some really good, high-quality rows of fruit, vegetables, whatever was growing. But there were some rows that were shvach, and we don't know. Is it an expensive row, might be worth $1,000, or was it a cheaper row, only with maybe a couple $100? We don't know. And Rabbi Ida Bar Avin had a havmina to learn. The Amar kum shlim shmeina b'meitav de'ikashto. And he wanted to say, when you're in doubt and you don't know what he ate, the meitav sadeu of the pasuk tells us that you have to pay the best of the best. It's very similar, like if you go into a parking lot and you take your receipt, and then when you leave, you have to give in your receipt, and then they tell you what you owe. It always says if you lose your receipt, you have to pay the maximum. So that's mamash meitav sadeu. You don't know which one was eaten, you have to pay the maximum. You don't say that. My timer, because I'm moitzim mechaber al. There's no logic to say that if we're not sure if I damaged a lot or damaged a little, that I have to pay more. Adrabah. In halacha, the default is I'm moitzim mechaber al. Ella, what could Rabbi Shmuel possibly mean with his meitav? Ella b'meitav delachamei. It obviously means that you're being mechayiv the mazik to pay, even though he damaged premature fruits. You're going to make him pay their potential, what they would be worth at full value. We look at the other fruits around what they ended up maturing into, and that's what this person will have to pay. And this is a whole new dimension to the machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva that we never knew about when we learned Avav, when we learned the actual sugya of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva. And here, our eyes have been opened to a whole new machlokes, a whole new layer of argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva. You look at the potential. Now, let's not confuse this with the shita that you actually have to pay for those pears. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is you look at a field not with premature pears. You look at a field that have mature pears in it, and you look at a field with mature pears versus a field that's missing a row of of mature pears, and that's the difference that you'll pay. But we're not suggesting that you're actually paying for those pears, because we always know it's always shaman agav karka. Okay, so that's the first chiddush that we just learned, which I think is a bombshell chiddush, because we were blissfully rolling through the Masechta as if we understood the Machlokes Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, and now Abaya opened our eyes up to a whole new dimension of Machlokes.
Yosy, please repeat the last line. I didn't have. How are
Even though we're saying you pay basar the royu, you pay basar the potential, it doesn't mean you pay for the actual value of the payers. That's from Shimon sheet in the Mishnah. It's still agav the karka, but there's a very big difference between looking at a field that has a whole bunch of little saplings versus a field that doesn't have those saplings. That's not such a big difference in cost. But if I'm looking at a field that's full of beautifully fully grown pears, and it's missing a row of fully blown pears, that's going to be a bigger damage, and that's the damage that we're saying here. Rabbi Yosy Aglili and Rabbi Shmuel hold that you have to pay for.
Even if he wasn't mazik the whole real mature pears.
Correct. The bulk would have grown into mature pears. That's what he has to pay.
So that means the mechayev in grumen, that really he wasn't mazik this yet. It wasn't mature, but because it would
you could call it grama, but he was mazik this that would have grown into a full peri. I'm not sure if grama is the right word for it, but you're definitely paying more than what you're actually damaging. You're paying for what you damaged in potential. We got a lot to cover today. Omar Mar, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda.
Yosy, he wants to ask.
No, I don't know if the Gemara will deal with this, but certainly the farmer does work to mature the Paris. Like he has to irrigate.
Oh, so you're asking similar to what someone asked last night. Of course, I don't have to pay for that extra work. In other words, you're telling me in order to achieve that potential, there's going to be a lot more effort and work. And
there's going to be more
by the owner.
I don't know, but
okay.
Right. So I don't think that will be right. But what you're asking is something that the Gemara will very shortly, very specifically address. So that's a very important point. When the difference in a not fully grown peri and a fully grown peri, there's a lot of cost to the nizik if that peri fully matures. Why should the mazik pay for fully matured peris? He should be able to deduct from it some of the cost that the nizik would have had to incur to achieve those pairs. So that actually is very much the focal point of the second half of our Omid. So I'm happy you brought up a point, Reb Shimon, because it's bang on what the Gemara is going to be focusing on.
Good question.
Clearly, this is not Reb Shimon's first time around, like it is for me. So I appreciate that. It gives me a big chizuk, because it means when next time I might also have Reb Shimon's kashas, and I might also be able to anticipate the Gemara's next kasha.
He asked the same question at yesterday's stuff.
That's right.
He said somebody asked it to you.
But I saved it up for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, so it's always so much more geschmack to scratch your hand when it actually itches. If it doesn't itch, scratching doesn't do much for you. So when there's a kasha asked, and then the Gemara asks the kasha, it makes the whole learning more geschmack because we're actually addressing an itch. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says. Zok Tehel Gemara. Omar Mar. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Eimer. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda said B'Shum Reb Shimon. And that we said it was very premature even before the level of smadar. That's where you pay agav karka. Hasmadar, we could be medayik. From what Reb Shimon ben Yehuda is saying is that by smadar he would hold roy noison ki'ilu anovim amdus libotzer. He would look at that like they're fully grown, and you pay the more expensive route. But look at the very next comment that Reb Shimon made. You ate grapes that are much more advanced, or figs that are much more advanced than smadar. Who the roin oisom ki'ilu anovim amdus libotzer. That's where Reb Shimon agreed that you pay for them as if they're fully grown fruit. Hasmadar, it's mashma that smadar, which is not as developed as pagan and boiser, roy noison Kama hi yafa, but kama hoisa yafa. Your shomit, you assess it agad the karka. So the question is, smadar is in the middle. Which way does it go? Reb Shimon doesn't seem to clarify that. Amar Ravina kroich v'tani. You have to wrap things together a little bit. Where do we say you go agav karka? Bizman she'achla lovik fanim v'yichvirtenim. Aval ach b'smadar, if you ate smadar or pagan or boiser, roy noison ki ilu anav moimdes libotzer. So the Gemara is understanding that Reb Shimon's sak is smadar is perceived as grown fruit like pagan and boiser. But the problem with that is that was exactly the shita of Rabbi Yosy Glili a moment ago. Rabbi Yosy Glili told us that when the animal eats shakas, you look at it like it's fully grown. So if that's the case, why would Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, repeat a shita that had already been mentioned earlier in the Brisa? In fact, the more Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Hani Rabbi Shua. I'm sorry, I mixed up. It's not Rabbi Yosy Glili. It's Rabbi Shua. Rabbi Shua says that smadar you pay as if it's a fully grown grape. So the question is, if anything, the Brisa should have just quoted that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda agrees with Rabbi Shua. Rather, the Brisa quotes Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda as his own independent shita, which would indicate that it's not exactly the same psak as Rabbi Shua. Zok to Gemara, and this is what Rabbi Shimon brought up. Do you take that into account? Sure, you make me pay now, even though I destroyed not a fully grown peri. I destroyed a premature peri. You make me pay if it's a full peri. But hey, there would have been cost to the nizik to achieve that fully grown peri. We're focusing specifically on it does take juice, it takes koyach, it takes energy, we can divine to support pears until they're fully ripened. And therefore, here the nizik is getting the benefit of a fully grown fruit without having to suffer the expense to get to that fully grown fruit. So here the Bryce is or the Gemara is directly discussing that sugya. Do you reduce from the payment of the mazik that the nizik would have had to incur, those expenses that the nizik would have had to incur in order to get to that full potential? And Zok Gemara, the machloikis between Rabbi Shua, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, and Rabbi Yeshua would be about kashkuf. But the problem is they don't make any comment directly about that. So how do we know who holds what? So tomorrow in fact, we don't know who holds what. We could say that they're not really repeating what the other one said. They have a dispute about this kashkufna if you take that into account, but we can't tell from what they said who says what. Abai Amar, what are you talking about? Mesaimi. It's quite clear who holds that we take into consideration kashkufna and we reduce the payment of the mazik accordingly. Man Tana the Chayish the Kashkufna, it's Rabbi Shimon ben Yehudi. It's Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, it's not Rabbi Shua. Because I have a brisa that shows Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda looks at the whole picture whenever you're assessing damages. And you never make a mazik pay for expenses that the nizik would have had to incur anyway. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, I remember Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, if Rahman al someone violates a woman, so he has to pay nezek, riboy sheves and boishes, but Eidim Shalom Zatzar. He doesn't pay for the pain that a woman of Basula, when she loses her Basulim, is very painful. Even though this violator, this rapist, cost her this pain, he doesn't have to pay for it. You know why? She's going to have this pain sooner or later anyway. Therefore, he doesn't have to pay for that because she would have had it anyway. So therefore, you see that we reduce from the liability of the mazik something that, even though he caused it, but the nizik would have had to incur that anyway. The Chacham said, what are you talking about? There's a much higher level of pain when someone violates a woman rather than when she's willingly engaged in intimacy. Because any diamond develops baraton, develops blindness. So it seems, as Tosfos mentions, that both the Chachamim here and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, they both agree that whatever pain she would have had to endure anyway, that the mazik, or in this case, the ma'anis, does not have to pay for. The question really is, did this lead to greater pain than what you would have had to incur anyway in her life? But I'll call upon them, you see this shita that you do take into account something that an expense that the nizik would have had, and that the mazik does not have to pay. Amar Abai, Hani Tanoi, These two Tanoim that we just quoted, meaning Reb Shimon ben Menashe and Reb Shimon ben Yehuda and Reb Shimon, who hold that you take into account expenses that the Nizik would have had to incur, they actually agree with a third Tana, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda. Amud over Echad. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Ha'adamor. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, we just discussed. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda holds that we take into consideration Chashkov, no? Ani Tanoi Mai. Who are the Tanoim? Titania Rabbi Yosy Omer Nechi Chaya. And Rashi tells us that the Gemara is discussing a case where a person hit a woman, and because of that, she lost her vlada, she lost her babies. And the halacha is he has to pay for the value of the vladas. The person who violated this woman, who punched her, has to pay for the value of the vladas. But think about this. Do you know how much it would cost if these vladas would have been born? I'm paying for their full value. But if these vladas would have been born, the husband would have had to pay a midwife to deliver the baby. He would have had to feed his wife a whole bunch of food during the pregnancy to take care of her. Now that these babies were killed, he's not going to have any of these expenses. So why should I have to pay you the full value of the child? Even if you had those children, you would have been out those expenses. So let me also deduct from my payment as the mazik the value of those expenses that you would have incurred had the baby survived. So the Tanya the mazik gets to deduct from the value of the babies the cost of the midwife that would have had to be paid by the husband. But the mazik can deduct any food, extra food that the husband would have had to feed his wife, in order to help her sustain and get through the pregnancy. So, if you hold, you even get to deduct the cost of the midwife. Surely the mazik can deduct the cost of food. However, you know why? Because not every woman needs a midwife. The Amar Lay, the husband could say, don't deduct the cost of the midwife. I never was going to pay for a midwife. Because my wife is very, very smart. She doesn't need a midwife. She can give herself. I'm sorry?
It says this week in the Parsha,
oh, that's right. So the lunar strikes again. The Noshim Tzidkonias in Mitzrayim, they didn't need midwives. They were able to deliver on their own. So this Nizik can say, don't deduct the cost of the midwife. Kichaya say that my wife was just like the woman in Mitzrayim, she would have been able to give birth without it. Granted, I would have had to feed her more, that you could deduct, but don't deduct the cost of the midwife. I would have never incurred that expense. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. And Papa, for Avuna B'Rei B'Shua. So now we're going to get back to the story with the Hugaver that led into this whole discussion. The Hugaver cut a decal down, and the Reish Galusa made him pay the value of the decal, which is the prime cost of it. And Reb Nachman said, no, you assess it echad b'shishim. And the Hugaver said, I'm not going to listen to you, Reish Galusa. I'm going to go to the lesser amount. So what is this? What is the resolution with this? Zok to Gemara. The story was as follows. They passed in a similar case with the dekel. They assessed the value of the tree not by itself, but in 60. Or they looked at the whole property that it was in, and they just looked at what difference that dekel being there would make to the value of the overall property.
What does the
if it was a dikla darma, which is not such a valuable dekel, there will blend it into its surroundings and will assess it agav the kaka or agav 60. But the hilchazik of a seder eshkalusa the dikla parsa. Dikla parsa were particularly unique and expensive trees, and those don't follow the normal rules that you just look at it agav kaka. They're very individual, and therefore the Reish Galusa is justified in saying that this tree you actually have to assess based on its own actual replacement value. Now we're going to have another very interesting story. Eliezer Zira, the young Eliezer, we're going to learn about that you're not allowed to be Farfrumt. So Eliezer Zira had the following story.
Yosy,
Yes.
Einsach sagt man, als Susanna do it yourself, but happens from YouTube. They told us.
Havasayim Misani. He was once upon a time wearing black shoes, and Rashi says black shoes was a minig of Elim. The Koi B'Shuka Dinarda. He was standing in the Shuk Darda. Basically, could have been perceived as somebody who's flaunting his overzealous Yerushalayim in mourning the Beis Hamikdash in public. Ashkechu de Reish Galusa. The house of the Reish Galusa saw this spectacle. He told him, "Maish na hanim esani. What's happened? You're wearing these shoes of Avelis. Amalahu the kamachil the kamavil na Yerushalayim. What says I'm being misabel Yerushalayim." Amalek told him, "At chashivis lisabula Yerushalayim. Who do you think you are? You're such a big tzaddik that you could be misabel Yerushalayim." Savar Yuhara Hava. They thought he was just a faker showing off, and that's a big avla. So Asuya v'chavshua, they put him into jail. Amalu, he told them, "Don't put him into jail. I'm royal lekach. I'm royal to display such a velos because gava rabba. I'm a great person." Amalu, they told him, "Minoyadin, prove to us that you're a great person." Amalu, he told them, "Either oy atun boy minoymil, so you can ask me a shaila and you'll see I'll be able to answer it to your satisfaction. Or I'll ask you a shaila and you'll be very impressed by the type of shaila that I asked." So first we need to stop and understand these shoes. Toysus brings a raya from a Gemara and Beitza that it was normal, everybody wore black shoes. So what is this black shoe issue? So Toysus concludes that everyone did wear black shoes, but they wore them with white straps. And he made his straps black as well. Those black straps on the shoes, that was a display of a velos, and that was the time. The other child, what is the big deal? So he showed a little bit extra velos. Why is that such a big deal? So it's brought down. There's a famous Gemara where I think it was Marzutra. Marzutra was the one who jumped into a fire because he didn't want to be seen. No, Marzutra was the one who jumped into a fire because his wife was with his wife we had. And he was a very holy, and I think it's Marzutra who said that my father's a gavarabba, I'm not a gavarabba. If my father's like wine, I'm like vinegar. Why? Because my father would wait 24 hours after he ate fleishiks to eat milchiks, and I only wait for the next suda, which we possibly is 6 hours, or depending on the minhagim, some people hold less, but most people hold 6 hours. So the shaila there is, I don't know, Marzutra was so hungry he needed to have his ice cream. We're talking about the Gedoyle Oilam, from eating his cheese blintz a little bit after he had fleishiks. So what does that mean? The Teretus Marzutra held that I'm not on the Madrega to wait 24 hours. It would be fakerish. It would be Yuhara. So you see, when it comes to taking upon chumras, it has to be appropriate. Don't be someone who speaks Lashon Hara a whole day, but then he says Tikkun Chatzos. That's pasnish. Person has to know what Madrega he's on and fears it accordingly. That's the Rechedach. Being a Farfrumt, that's not the Rechedach. A person has to know. You should do all those things, but you should also be holding the body.
The reason because he has to first cry on his own heart, and then he could cry on the Chacham Basel like this.
I hear. The other interesting point is Vosdap's shoes are so relevant to the Parsha of Avelos. Vosdap's shoes. So it's brought down a very interesting thought, and that is, when we make Shasali Kaltsarki, that we make that when we put our shoes on. That's totally putting on our shoes. Vosdap's shoes, right? The answer is that shoes are unique because there's levels of creation. There's doimeim, there's shemeach, there's chai, there's medaber. Each one is able to consume the other for its growth, right? The shemeach eats the doimeim, it eats the air, it eats the water, and that's how it grows. That's what shafts it. And the animal eats the vegetation, and that's how it grows. A human can eat the animal. So we're in each level of creation controls the level of creations below it and use that to internalize it for their growth, for their ruchnis. And that's how they model them. So when we wear shoes, that's showing that we're balabatim of the belt. in the Beis Hamikdash you weren't allowed to wear shoes, right? You were not allowed to wear shoes in the Beis Hamikdash because when we're going to the Boyer Olam and we're Efes Va'ayin neged the Boyer Olam, we have to show that sure in the Welt we might have Shlita, but when it comes to the Boyer Olam, we're Efes Va'ayin. So therefore, we didn't wear shoes in the Beis Hamikdash because that showed that we're Efes Va'ayin no matter how great we are in the level of creation. So not wearing displaying avelis in our shoes is very much showing that although we're the top of the bria, l'gabe the Rebbeinu Shalom, we're Efes Va'ayin. That's one reason why shoes were. The other reason some of the Rishonim say is Rabbi Lowy always speaks by the Nilas Achag by Yafu Pamayach B'Nalayim. The people's shoes walking to Yerushalayim and walking home from Yerushalayim. That's the whole beauty of the Beis Hamikdash. We lost that once the Churban Bayis happened, and that's why shoes is a big remez of Golus of Avelos for the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so let's see the Shaila that was discussed to prove that Elazar Zeira was a Reish Galut. Amrloi. So they told him, Boya, you ask Askashai. Amrlu, so he asked the following Shai. Haimanda cuts kufra. Someone cut a premature fig. A premature date. What does he pay? My Mishalim. Amrlu, what do you mean? Mishalim make kufra. You pay the value of what you damaged. In fact, tomorrow, so Belezer asked them, tomorrow, but they're going to grow into tomorrow. Don't you consider the fact that they're going to grow and they have a bigger potential? I'm like, okay, Mishalim's made tomorrow. I'm but that's not either good. I'll tomorrow shop. I didn't take it tomorrow, so why should I pay for that? I'm like, I hear you have a good point. So what do we do? You tell us what the psak should be. We told him Bishishim. You look at the property and you see what it's worth with it, without it, based on 60 the amount, and that'll take into account some of the potential, because of course when a person buys a property, he looks at what's in the property and what value it brings. Who agrees with you? This is your own chiddush. Amalu, you know what? Don't trust me. Hashmuel Chai, Uvedina Chayim. Shmuel, the great Pesach, is alive. His business is still in session. Go ask him. Shaduk made Shmuel. Amalu, he told him, Shapir Karmeluchu. Elazar Zeira knows exactly what he's talking about. B'shishim. And therefore, Vishavku, once they saw he was an Adam Gadol, they said, you know what? You have a right to be Misabel in Yerushalayim, and therefore we'll let you free. Rab Shimon Amar, Achla Peiris Gemurin. So Rab Shimon said, all this is only if you're talking about potentially grown things. But what if it's already fully grown in the field? It just hasn't been cut yet, but it's fully grown and ripe and ready to go. There you pay the value of the pairs. My time effect Gemara. The Terjit Hod Amar Rachmana Ubir B'Steyacher Malamid Sheshamin Al Gav Asada. That's how the midi the tzarechlos. That's fruit that still need the field for their growth. Hani, these fully grown pears, even the latrichi lusada, since they don't need a field anymore, they're completely ripened and ready to be cut. Beinayu boyishlum. You have to pay for their actual value. Amar Vuna Barchia, Amar Birmi Barabba, Don Rab Meir, Don Rav Rab Meir, in one hasugya, Rav passing like Rab Meir, who passes Allah like Rab Shimon, and he passes like Rab Shimon in a different sugya. Don Rav Rab Meir Netanya. We know that there are certain properties that are meshubah to a woman's ksuba, and those properties a husband cannot sell. She has a right to seize them from the lakeah. But what if she might have waived her rights to those? What happens if kasav l'rishon? The husband gave away a field to a third party, and she refused to sign on it, meaning she didn't want to relinquish her shibud on that field. But then Lasheni, then he wrote a different property to somebody else. The chasmalay on the second property, she did sign on the star to agree to it. The halach is abdak subasa. She has given up her ksuba because clearly she's showing that she's willing to this deal. Divrei Meir. And Rashi tells us if she twice didn't want to sign, or if she signed both times, that's not a raya that she really gave up her ksuba. She can say, my husband pressured me and I didn't want to have a fight with him, so I signed, but I didn't really mean it. But here, she shows she has the backbone to stand up to her husband, because the first time he asked her to sign, she refused, and the next time she did, it proves that even though she could have refused him, she knowingly and willingly did not, and that's why we consider her signing as an approval to give up her sheep. So that was the halacha of her. No, I never meant it. I wanted to make him feel good. Why didn't do the first time? Kasha. But I never really meant to relinquish my claim. I just didn't want to fight. What do you want from me? I want to retain my rights to seize that property on behalf of my ksuba. So that was the first thing that Rav Paskin. Upasuk Hilchasa Reb Shimon, and the also pasuk Reb Shimon. Yad Etnan Reb Shimon Omer Achla Peres Kemurin Mishalem Es Peres Kemurin Im Im Sasai. I was just asked if anybody has an art scroll. Why does the Gemara change when it's talking about the case of the ksuba? It says done Rav Reb Meir, but when it talks about our case of damages paid by a mazik, it says Upasuk Hilchasa Reb Shimon. They're both Choshe Mishpat. Does anybody see any reason why the Gemara changes its nusach between discussing the psak of ksuba versus the psak of paying damages? Does the Art Scroll say anything? No. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah Bible. Hamagdish b'soich sadach. Someone piles up his wheat, his grain in somebody else's field. We had similar cases to this, and we're going to see a little chiddush that comes out of this Mishnah that would justify why Rabbi wrote this Mishnah. Shaloi rishus, he put it into his chaver's property without rishus. V'chaltan behemto shel balasada, and the behem of the balasada ate his produce. Potter, of course, the balasada is potter because he had no right to bring his things in there. V'mhusko behen bal godish. But if the animal of the balasada got damaged from eating it, the balagadish is chayiv. Now, if you remember, Rav told us that the owner of the parish could say, your animal shouldn't have eaten it. You see from this Mishnah, a shita that argues it around. So this is one reason why this Mishnah could have been quoted, would be to illustrate a dissenting opinion that says the owner of the Gadish cannot say, but if he had permission to bring his Gadish into the field, then the balasada would be chayiv if his animal ate my Gadish. And of course, I wouldn't be chayiv, the balagadish surely wouldn't be chayiv if the animal of the balasada got damaged. This seems to be contradictory to Rebbe Shita that we had at the beginning in last parak. If you remember, Rebbe said that even though I give you permission to come into my property, I'm not taking any achrayas for anything, unless I specifically tell you that I'm taking achrayas. So maybe this Mishnah disagrees with Rebbe, which was the second shita in the Mishnah that we learned in the last parak. So Amar Papa, no. This is speaking in a different case, and this is another reason why Rebbe would have quoted this Mishnah, because this is a new halacha. It's speaking benotar the veidari askina. The way they used to work it is everybody who had their fields in the valleys, they would all bring their grain into one person's field, and then they would hire one shomer to watch all those piles of grain, rather than everybody have to incur the expense of hiring their own shomer. So that's what this case was. It was a guy's property who, he was the guy that you would take care of the shmir for everybody. Therefore, the chivin the amalei ayil u'gedoish, once he gives you permission to bring your grain into his property, that's what he's doing. He's providing a shmira, ayil va'antalachu, that's what it means. But in a regular person who's allowing you to bring something to his property, Rebbe would still maintain that the person is not accepting upon himself a chrayis, he is just allowing you to put your things into his property. Zok the Mishnah, we had this Mishnah many times. You set the fire with the Yad Cher Shebekatan. You did a big avla, but Lamaisa you're not liable for damages. Therefore, Pater b'din the Adam, the Chai b'din the Shemayim, because you caused a lot of trouble. Shalach b'yat pikeach. What if you sent fire with pikeach and he lit something on fire? Of course, a pikeach chai. Echad hevi yesov. What if someone brought fire? So someone lit a little bit of fire. The echad hevi yesov. Then another guy came and put a whole bunch of wood on the fire to make it grow and spread and last. So the last person is always chayiv. Maybe it's eitzim chayiv. The last person there is chayiv for all the damages. What about the opposite? Someone brought a big pile of wood. The second guy came and ignited it. Again, maybe it's or chayiv. The last guy is chayiv. What if someone came to an existing fire, but he fanned it up and made it really blow up? Again, the last guy's chayiv. What if it would not have normally ignited or spread, and the wind came and made it spread? Then everybody is going to be potter. Okay, we'll stop here, and tomorrow's sugya. Tomorrow's going to be a bombadik adaf. I hope to be back in person. Tomorrow's going to be a Bava de Gadaf, discussing many important sugyas and halachos. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Tomorrow at 7 o'clock, right?
Tomorrow's New Year's Day. Yes, the mission of 7 o'clock.
You
Okay,
can
have a
understand
wonderful day.
6. Have a normal day of work.